Welcome to our podcast, We're Not So Different.
I'm Samira.
And I'm Ali. We're two professionals having real conversations about our experiences at home, work, and out in the community.
We tell our stories through the lens of our different backgrounds to just find out that we're not so different.
In our podcast, we'll explore ways that we can improve engagement and bridge social gaps while trying to find the humor in it all.
Check us out on social media at WNS Different or email us at wnsdifferent@gmail.com.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about Bridging the Gap, a guide to cultural engagement. So oftentimes in work and social life, you run into different people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and there's always questions about how do I engage this person? How do I talk to this person? If it's work, if it's social life, and sometimes you hear that more from certain demographics than from others. So hopefully we can talk about different things that come up that are issues and solutions to some of those things. Try to solution how do you bridge that gap at work and in social life? So one of the things that's near and dear to my heart, Samira, is there's different ways in which people interact at work. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've been accused of rather, is...
I can't wait because I was literally, as you're talking about the intro, I was thinking about the conversation we had earlier in the kitchen. And I just wanted to see how this is going to go.
I'm accused of so many things. So one thing that I've been accused of is people say, Ali, I don't know a lot about you.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
And it's weird because my personality is one where I can hold a conversation with just about anyone. Mm-hmm. I can carry a conversation if need to, or just ask enough questions to keep it going. Mm-hmm. So people just assume, this person is outgoing and free flowing, full of information, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But moving on to the issue at hand is really people carry themselves differently. And I find myself restrictive in what I say mm-hmm. based upon the audience.
Sure.
So if someone says, I don't know a lot about this person, mm-hmm. one thing that I would think about if I'm a person from another culture is, what has that person been through to make them feel that way? And I've had people even point that out and say, what have you gone through that makes it so that you can be untrusting or untrustworthy or of just your general environment? And perception, we know in culture, plays a huge part in how you're treated, right? So typically when I'm at work, mm-hmm. I try to leave all of the extracurriculars and all the hobbies and all the, extra information about, what I did over the weekend and this, that, and the other. I kind of leave that mm-hmm. at bay because part of me feels like it could be used against me.
Have you experienced it being used against you?
I have experienced it being used against me, for sure. So, and let's get to the meat of it. So from a historical perspective, people of color in general are going to be wary or cautious of other groups of people based on what could be used to undermine them, right? Historically, so when my father, for example, mm-hmm. worked for the government agency that he worked for, he definitely experienced treatment that was indicative of the time, mm-hmm. right? So he's a black man working pseudo government, in government, you can only go so far. You have the glass ceiling to deal with, mm-hmm. so on and so forth, right? But the information that you provide to people around you mm-hmm. from a career advancement standpoint, or just I don't like this person's standpoint, could potentially be used against you. So when I've heard stories from him, I was kind of like, you know what? That kind of makes sense. And when I got into my early corporate life, I could see those things transpire not only based on treatment, but just adoption of a specific work culture.
Okay.
Those things started to make a difference in how people looked at you or what they assumed about you. So I feel like when it comes to this, being culturally aware of other groups of people, and that it may not be based on experience, it may not be in their best interest or what they feel is their best interest to volunteer a lot of information. And it doesn't mean that that person doesn't like you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that they don't want to be part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that they're not drinking the company Kool-Aid, right?
Because who doesn't love the company?
Exactly,
Kool-Aid?
right, of course. It doesn't mean that, right?
Right.
Being quiet or not sharing a ton of information doesn't mean that. People need to understand that there is a level of trust that needs to be built across cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that it's 2019, but we can pull up any number of news stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understand that just because it's 2019 doesn't mean people treat you as though it's 2019. They might treat you as though it's 1965. And that goes for both minority groups and women, right? There's a women component as well.
Sure.
Right?
So what I'm hearing is, you brought up the aspect of sharing at work and not talking about your personal things because you don't necessarily trust people at work, or does it matter who the person is, or is it on a case by case scenario?
Yeah, I think it definitely matters. I think we all develop relationships with people at work, right?
Right.
There are some people that you develop relationships with and they become really good friends, right? And people that you hang out with outside of work,
Right.
for example.
Or like us.
Right, exactly. You
Right.
you
Hate each other.
right. And you work through your cultural differences and you develop a podcast and you have a great time together.
Yeah. In spite of that.
In spite of it all. But there's tearing at work, right? Like even taking this component out of it, there are some people that you bond with at work and some people you don't. There's some
Absolutely.
bosses that you get close with and there's some people that you don't, right?
Okay.
What I'm talking about is those people that think that you are being anti because you don't want to answer all the questions that they have for you at work. What exactly did you do this weekend?
Well, what kind of? I see what you're saying.
They're inundating you with a lot of questions, and they're filling their coffers with information about you.
So, do you feel like if somebody comes and asks you, "What did you do this weekend?" or "How was your weekend?" do you feel like they're fishing for information, or are they just trying to be polite or cordial or be your friend?
I have two answers for that.
Okay.
One is, in some cases, yes, based on the person. In other cases, it's just casual work pleasantries, right? It's what people do. And typically I just say, "Oh, my weekend was fine." Sure. And I leave it at that. So
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Do you feel like that has prevented you from moving up, or?
Yes.
Okay. Then why do you continue to do that?
Because of the potential consequence of going the other direction. So I'll give you an example.
Okay.
So at one of the companies I worked for, I knew a person there that had, one of the, people have these hobbies outside of work, right?
Right.
So one of their hobbies was hunting.
Okay.
Right. And so that person talked about hunting on a regular basis.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Right. So regardless how you feel about it, like
Sure.
that's what they did. But he was a white male.
Okay.
And the way that he talked about it was fun and inspiring and invigorating from how he, don't misunderstand, from how he presented it, as though it's fun for him and invigorating for him.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone around them just kind of were like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. Great. Great thing for you to do. Great. Yeah, that's no problem." Then I witnessed another person there who was a minority. And they mentioned that one of their hobbies was they played in a band, but the band was not American music, right? It was Latin music.
Oh, interesting.
So it was like banda, right? Like mariachi almost.
Oh,
right?
wow. Okay.
And I noticed that the people around him were kind of like, that's interesting. You play mariachi. And the questions about it were very much kind of like, Well, you're here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you continue to do that? What instrument do you play? Why don't you kind of change that into a different style or something else?
Really?
Like, there was no respect for it.
Like what kind of questions were they asking specifically? Do you remember?
It was a long time ago, but it was kind of questions like, oh, well, I think, I don't know if they play, I don't know what, I can't remember the instrument they played, but they were very much questions around like, well, is that something you grew up on? But as you got older, what's the reason you still continue to do that?
Oh, wow.
Like now that
why would you carry on this
tradition? Like now that you're here, why would you still do that? Like, so what I'm getting at is there is judgment placed on it because it's not culturally a thing here based on where you are, right?
It's kind of like the whole playing golf.
Yes.
Thing, like if you don't play golf, like if you want to be an executive, they say learn how to play golf, learn how to play tennis. With these primarily Caucasian dominated sports.
Right. Right. That's the thing.
Like that, yeah. So let's talk about you, because you bring up a great point, and I think that everyone can relate to that feeling of going to work and not feeling like you can be 100% yourself because that your normal activities and your normal, just whoever you are and whatever you are isn't necessarily accepted. Just like when I go to work and it was a Persian holiday, it was Charshamba Suri, and I go the next day, someone says, how was your night? I'm like, great, I jumped over a fire. People think that's weird.
Right.
Like, that's so weird. Why would you do that?
Right.
Because it's awesome. It's fun. But, so what we want to talk about though right now is also what do we do in those situations?
Yeah.
Like let's take it from the perspective of the employee.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm a firm believer in I own the world that I create. Right?
Good point.
So yes, are these prejudices there? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Are these, is it intentional? Sometimes. Is it unconscious? Sometimes.
Yep.
Do I know when it's what? I don't know, but I can kind of guess.
Yes. Right.
Through life experience,
Yeah.
you can kind of guess and sense when it's intentional and when it's just an unconscious thing. It's unintentional. It's ignorance. It's whatever the situation is. And I think that as an individual, the only thing that I can control are my views.
Correct. And
the meaning and the significance that I add to those views.
Yeah.
And, naturally I'm going to add something to it based off of my history and my, self-fulfilling prophecies.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's my responsibility to kind of set myself and be like, okay, how much of what just happened is fact-based? Mm-hmm. And how much it is the significance that I'm adding to it.
Sure.
Right. So, the advice I would give someone who's in that situation is, to always try to take a second and do that quick assessment. I mean, it takes time to do, especially at first, but eventually it goes by a lot quicker to kind of see, okay, of what just happened. For example, and I'm not saying I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
On your example with the Hunter and the mariachi music, when you said Hunter, I cringed. When you said mariachi music, I was like, oh, that's cool.
Party time.
Yeah, party time.
Right,
Let's dance. Let's get down.
Mm-hmm.
But that's partially because I don't understand hunting. You said words like inspiring. Mm-hmm. I don't know how killing anything is inspiring.
Right.
I don't understand it. And in all fairness, I've never tried to understand it, right? But, I grew up in Fresno, California. I had a lot of Mexican friends, so mariachi music was around regularly. Yep. So it's like, oh, it's familiar for me. It's fun. It's cultural. It's all of those things. So for me, and I can see how in different industries and in different environments it would be taken differently. So, like in the situation where the mariachi music was being played, how much of that was your perception of, maybe they were asking those questions because they didn't understand it. They didn't know. They don't understand it. They're trying to understand. Because for me, what I feel like, you have people who are just assholes.
Yeah.
Arrogant, self-righteous, pretentious, have no desire to kind of understand what's happening on the other side, and they don't want to accept any response. They don't want to acknowledge their own privilege at all. And then you have people who don't get it and who don't understand it and who are in good intentions trying to learn it. So they do ask these questions, right? And then there's also the part of, and this is a total other conversation, but I'll just say it, is that why is it my job? right, to answer these questions, but at the same time it's like, this is what this podcast is for, so if you listeners are out there just direct them to us and let them ask us questions. We'll answer on your behalf.
Right, exactly. Because to your point, and I like what you brought up, because sometimes I think with the example I was bringing up, and I think what I was getting at, and some listeners will be able to relate to it, is sometimes we don't want to be the first. We don't want to be the person that suffers a consequence. We don't want to be the person that's talked about behind closed doors to upper management and whatever. Like, oh yeah, that guy Ali's all right, but do you know that he and his cousins, they go out and they do, they party late night on Saturdays and Sundays at some club where they play all hip hop, and I just kind of wonder about the type of music, and people still have those types of conversations, right? Especially when you think about the demographic, and could be even the age group, right, of the folks that are in leadership positions, right? Their judgments of what you listen to, their judgments of what you like, those things all play a part in their perception of you, and ultimately how they see you as being groomed or ready for positions of leadership, et cetera, et cetera.
I just want to say something real quick to that point. Please don't forget your spot. But as you were saying that, I was thinking, my thought process went to, I'm pretty sure that they're not thinking that deeply into it. However, I think what you're bringing up is a great point, because this is where unconscious bias comes in.
100%.
It might not be their full thought train of how they're dwelling on, Ali does this, A, B, and C. It may not. It's more like it's just that automatic judgment.
It's the automatic.
It's that automatic of what does that mean when a bunch of black men are going out to a hip hop club?
Right.
What does that look like?
What does that look like? What's the perception? Because for me, what I do is I'm at home and I go out with my wife or my family and we go listen to honky tonk. We go listen to rock and roll. And that gives me a different, now even for me as a black man, that's a whole different thing for me, right? I'm thinking about what I've seen or what I've heard. I'm like, I don't know about that, right?
Like,
exactly. I don't know if I would do that, but and that's what I'm getting at is when you start to layer a thought process, it's the knee-jerk reaction, it's the thoughts that come with it. How is it, unfortunately, we as humans, it's just behavior. How is this person most like me? And that's the person I like the most. How is this person unlike me? That is the person I dislike, or the reasons that I dislike.
Right.
And so I think that's an important thing to clue in on. It's not that I expect someone to overtly say, oh, I hate hip hop, I hate you, I hate your friend. It's not about that. It's about the subtle things that go on when you're in the workplace, the subtle things that go into thinking about promotions, thinking about advancement, thinking about succession plans, those sorts of things.
Those friendships that you build,
it's
those
the
allies
friendships
that you build at work.
Exactly. And we've all seen that, right? These
every
two people
job I've ever had.
They're best friends, and that person's on the fast track. And if you notice, what is the relationship between that person and their boss? And of course, some people, they just fake it till they make it, right? They're just like, hey, I'll say whatever, do whatever, get involved in whatever, as long as I can align myself here. And I just honestly just don't have the person.
And then on my personal time, I'll do whatever.
Yeah, I'll do whatever, right? So I think, so back to your point, though, when we talk about what to do, it is the time to represent yourself. It is the time to be who you are. Yeah. And what I mean by that is the obvious and the not so obvious. Right? The obvious is speaking up and sharing and that sort of thing. The not so obvious is using it as a moment or a time to educate. Right? To say, this is what I do, this is who I am, and here are the reasons why. And like you said, which is a different conversation of, why do I have to be the one to justify and explain? We don't move forward without it. Yeah. Right?
Exactly. We don't, and I think that's why employee resource groups and engineering networking groups are so critical for organizations is because if I know that I have a group of people who understand me and that I'm not alone, it empowers me just a little bit more to be able to confidently have those conversations and to know that I have pipelines directly to executives who stand with me. It helps facilitate much more effective conversations. So from the individual perspective, it's really own your dialogue, own your reactions, and own how you present and represent yourself and your community at work. Because it really does make a difference. You know, we get, it's easy to get overwhelmed with everything that's going on out in the world. But the best way to make a difference is in your world, in your communities, at work, at your social gatherings, with your friends, with your family, with your neighbors. Those are the best ways to start those ripple effects. Because if at least 10 people in the community are having these types of conversations, it just expands. Like, you know, even I look at my dad. My dad was very prejudiced against everyone, really. And I may have mentioned this before.
No one's excluded.
No one is excluded. He's an equal opportunity critic. He's just a very critical person in general. And because he didn't have a lot of exposure to real intimate relationships with people outside of our community, you know, I had to have a lot of conversations with him about what the African American diaspora was. What is their story? What about the Latino community? What is their story? What is their background? What are their challenges? And I can honestly say it's made a huge, huge difference. And that's kind of where it starts, is when we have these conversations. Now, if you're a leader listening to this podcast, one of the things that I highly recommend people that I know that are in leadership positions is it's really simple. Listen.
Yes.
Listen to the people around you and listen to everyone. When you're in a meeting, listen to the people who are speaking. Listen to who it's coming from and take an interest to try to understand. So for example, if you see that, you know, you went to Ali and asked how his weekend was, and he's just like, it's fine. And you want to dig more. So if I want to know more about Ali and I'm someone that you may just not trust because of, you know, history and your biases against leadership or white men or whoever it may be, whoever the leader is, what is the best way for me to reach out to you, or for that leader to reach out to you and to connect with you?
So I would say this, and I've had some good and bad examples. And the good examples, and I've had good examples of Caucasian. I've had a great white boss, right? And I've had bad black bosses, and you know, it runs the gamut. But what I find is honesty or truth through action. If someone can look at you and say, that person is fair in how they lead, their instruction to those beneath them, right? Their direct reports, right? How they engage and interact. Are they aware of their own macro and micro inequities? Do I treat everyone the same way? When it comes to review time, am I nitpicking one person and glorifying someone else for doing half as much work? People want to know that trust. So there's two ways of thinking about this. Some people say, well, trust is automatically given. But in some communities, trust is earned.
Yeah.
You don't walk into a room and say, oh, I trust this person just because of how they look and they say they're a doctor, so they must be. No. No, that's not the case. Trust is an earned thing. And what we're talking about here from a cultural aspect is that trustworthiness. The history may not be great, but the future can be a lot better. But you have to understand, what are the mechanisms for us to get there? Trust is a huge part of it. I want to see to your point, that you take an interest in my ideas and the things that I bring to the table as much as you do with anyone else, right? I want to know that when I provide feedback, upward feedback, right? You take my upward feedback seriously and say, hey, here are some things that I can do differently as a leader to make sure that my direct reports feel as though they're engaged, feel as though they're in it. Because it's not about asking about the weekend.
Right.
I go to work to earn a living, right?
Yep.
So I get it. Some people are much more like, oh, I did this and I did that. And then I made, picnic baskets and Santa Claus came over and we had tea and crumpets. And I get that. Some people, I know I can be ridiculous. Some people are like, hey, I come to work to do my job, do my 8 and I'm going, leave me alone.
Yeah.
That person, right? Because that's the core of it for most people as far as earning a paycheck.
Yeah.
But for that person too, don't ostracize that person for that. Understand as a leader, your job is to turn over what? A product, right? You have a leader that you need to respond to. You have a leader that you answer to, right? So your group needs to function as a cohesive unit.
Absolutely.
And the different personalities and the different cultures in your group, you need to understand.
Right.
So the person that's not going to talk to you in detail about what happened over the weekend, they feel acknowledged when their ideas are heard, when they're listened to in the workplace, when their suggestions for the way that a group should move or the way a group should function, those things are taken into consideration. And it's not the other person just because they'll talk you to death about what they did last weekend.
Sure.
And building that sort of trust and engagement on a professional level, because that's what we're supposed to be first. We're at work, right? Building that on a professional level gives me a lot more hope and a lot more freedom to say, hey, you know what? This is a good boss.
Okay.
Right? I feel more comfortable being open with how I am maybe outside of work a little bit more. Okay. Because you've shown me from a professional level, because you are a professional and a leader, that you know how to engage your team. And just because someone is not as socially engaged, that does not impact your perception of them.
Got it.
Right? And so it goes back to what we talked about the friendship thing. But the friendship is built upon commonalities. What do we do? What do we like together versus, or how does this person respond versus someone else? Right. And you start to unconsciously build this divide between two different people. But it's like, that's not really what you should do as a leader, right?
Right.
You're there to lead a group of people that have a different background, different understanding, different perceptions, different views on life. Yeah. But your primary job is to lead a team of people to turn over a result.
Right. And I think as the world is and the workforce is becoming more and more diverse, this is something that leaders just don't know to do. I don't necessarily think that it's intentional. However, I also don't see as much dialogue around it and as much, reflection around it as there should be. I still think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to inform leaders that, hey, this is what's happening.
Right.
And if you really want to have an effective team, if you really want the engagement of all your people, you need to take that time and reflect on yourself and see how you are impacting other people's ability to show up and give 100%. And
I get that. I get that it's difficult, right? Because we talk about metrics at work a lot, right? Yeah. We talk about, did I meet this? I mean, this metric. And there's a lot of pressure on the metric piece of it. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we are human. Yeah. So we see the professional metrics, and that's our one judgment of the engagement of my team. And then the other piece of it is, well, who do I get along with the most and have the most fun with?
Right.
Right. And that sometimes those things sort of seep together sometimes. Yeah. And from a professional standpoint, technically they really shouldn't. You want people. They
shouldn't, but there's something to be said about having, when you have good chemistry with somebody, work no longer seems like work. It seems like play. And you end up being more productive. Because I know I've been to meetings with people who are not that great, but we have great energy and great chemistry. So in less time, we can come up with a good result. But I've been in meetings with people who are super smart, super great, but it's so painful to just be in a meeting with them that it's just like, I know you're brilliant, but oh my God, this is brutal. right? So it does, I don't want to be so, optimistic and idealistic to say that, it's going to happen, that, people are going to just go based off of their work. It's not. We're human beings.
Sure.
So I think it's important for everyone listening to realize that there is an aspect of it that you own,
Correct.
right? So you are responsible for the relationships that you build. You are responsible to how you land. So for example, if I am trying to connect with you, so if you were talking about people who don't share, I'm a sharer. I don't need to trust you to share with anything because I don't feel like I don't feel like you have that type of influence.
Correct.
And I think that a lot of that comes to my faith,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I believe that God is my protector. So there's nothing you can do.
Right.
There's nothing you can do because God's going to protect me. So I don't have to worry about you stabbing me behind the back, because if you do, that's between you and God. That karma is coming on you. So I don't have to worry about it. So that's kind of, for me, it's like I share freely because I don't care. Like
Right.
But the thing on the counter of that, if someone doesn't share with me, I don't trust them. Isn't that interesting?
Well, here's the thing. I don't disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But the question becomes, if this is not a social environment,
Mm-hmm.
and we're here to get something done, and I don't necessarily know you that well,
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about owning your relationships and owning your dialogue and owning your culture and owning your feelings, that should also be something to own. I should own it just because someone is not telling me in detail about their hobbies and their loves and all these other things, or I see them interact with someone else
Mm-hmm.
that they may have more in common with,
Mm-hmm.
and that interaction looks like a whole lot of fun. But when I approach that person, it's very kind of straightforward. To your point, we are human and we take that.
Mm-hmm.
From a career aspect, from a leader aspect, from an employee aspect, self-awareness is important, right? We need to be aware of how we are taking or how we are receiving the action of others. Am I disrespectful to you, or do I just say, oh, I just kind of hung out at home?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the picture, Snoop Dogg in the hallway at a hotel party and all the lights and stuff are going on. Me and my friends exchange this meme periodically, but whatever. Long story.
That story might be a whole podcast episode on its
It's
own.
like, this is what I said, but this is what really happened that week. It is. I like what you brought up, and I like what you're saying, because it is a huge struggle. It's a grand struggle between what do I give of myself
Mm-hmm.
at work with people that I don't really know outside of work. I don't know their intentions and their goals. We've all worked for people that were jerks. We've all worked for people that were good bosses.
Mm-hmm.
We've all worked for people that picked favorites.
Yeah.
No matter how hard you tried, no matter how good you were.
Mm-hmm.
We also know people that focus solely on work. But this is really to say, if we are going to culturally evolve at work, I have to be prepared that, like you said, oh, my faith has me, so I'm not worried about it.
Yeah.
But for someone else who's experienced the opposite,
Correct.
they're like, well, faith or not, that cost me some money in this promotion. So-and-so being their favorite. And it's really to remind all of us, and also to remind myself, that everyone is not always out to get you.
Yeah.
And opening up may be something that can be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
It's how you do it. It's owning your culture and owning who you are. And I think one thing that's interesting that I thought about while you're talking about this is ask the same questions that you're being asked about what you do. So if someone's asking you like, oh, okay, you said you celebrated a Iranian holiday, and you said you jumped over fire. You're not necessarily sure if you want to share that. When you feel comfortable, you can share that.
Yeah.
Here's what I did. Here's the reason why I did it. Here's the historical context of that specific act or that specific celebration.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about what you did on your weekend, and if they celebrated a holiday or something like that, even if you know, ask them about that background, right? Allow them the opportunity or challenge them with, why don't you explain what it is that you do? Because oftentimes it's the minority group, and I don't mean minorities, but the minority group that is looked at as like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
But if you turn that into, so you celebrate Christmas, right? Tell me about where did that originate from? What's that about? Right, but then you don't know.
That's a loaded way to ask. It's like, the way you just said it to me, I'm like, what is your intention?
Right.
Like, what are you trying to get at here?
What's this Christmas thing you got to celebrate?
What is this Christmas thing?
What's this Christmas thing? But that could be a real thing for someone who's not from here.
Yeah,
right?
For someone who's
not from, that's a real
or
thing.
Or even
like,
you could ask, like, are you traditional or just, commercial type?
Exactly.
Like me, I'm totally a commercial Christmas celebrator.
Let's have a conversation about that too. Let's have a conversation about your celebrations. Let's have a conversation about your culture, even though it's popular.
Yeah.
Right? It may not necessarily be what I do. I've had a coworker ask me before, hey, Ali, St. Patrick's Day's coming up. You celebrating? And it was funny because I kind of looked at him and I was just like, my answer was kind of a smart ass answer. I was just like, yeah, it's kind of weird. When I was growing up, my father didn't really celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Not really sure why, but he just didn't. Because it was one of those things like, because, right. I'm like, it's not an Irish holiday. But when your culture is dominant, the assumption is, oh, everybody does this. Everybody drink green beer on St. Patrick's Day because everybody's Irish, question mark? Right? Like,
and it's so funny because I think and maybe for you it was different. But for me growing up is like, even though I knew it was an Irish holiday, like I still wore green.
Right.
Like I still thought it was fun.
Yeah, everybody gets pinched and all that.
Chocolate gold coins and stuff. I mean, what's wrong with that?
But that's a great time to say, and how I should have handled that situation is from a culturally advanced standpoint, right? It should have been, more along the lines of, my father's black, he's from the South. Like that wasn't a thing for him growing up. I don't have any Irish in my blood. If you hadn't noticed, maybe not, I don't know. But then go into, why don't you tell me more about it?
Yeah.
Why don't you explain to me what St. Patrick's Day is? What does it represent?
Yeah.
What are its origins? How did it make it to the West? Is it traditional? How has it changed?
Involved in this celebration? Like, how can I participate?
Right.
How does that even work?
Right. And then, after St. Patty's Day, we roll into the 26th of December. Maybe that person asked me about Kwanzaa. Who knows,
Maybe.
right? Like,
maybe. Well, yeah, because it's also, that brings up a great conversation, because I think a lot of these holidays aren't necessarily about the origin and the culture, but it's about the spirit behind it.
True.
Right? But to get back on topic of bridging the cultural gap at work, especially, for the employees, it's just really important to be self-aware of how you're showing up and how you land to your audience, and leaders to do the same thing. But I think the onus is on the leaders to really take that time and get to know your employees one-on-one, individuals.
Yes.
I know we talked about this off air earlier about how I've been to meetings, and I'm not sure if this is a woman thing or what this is about, but I've been to many meetings where I bring up a valid point, of some facts, a solution, and it's as if I didn't even say anything, even though I'm making strong eye contact when I say it.
Right. Here's my idea.
Speaking clear English. It's as if I never said it, and then they come back either in that meeting or 2 days later with the same solution or idea that I brought up, as if, and they present it to me as if I wasn't the one who said it.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, for a lot of different reasons. And that's one I definitely think we should develop. We should go into more detail, because I think we have an episode coming up, that's about the role, how women are perceived, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going to go into detail on that in perception, because that comes up. That's not only a social thing, but also rolls over into the career aspect of things. So we're definitely going to dive into that more. But to your point for now, I think that is a key thing for leaders. And here's a piece that I want to focus on when it comes to employees, which is be a human ally. Be an ally of the people on your team, in your group that have great ideas, and be their representative, be their sponsor. Say, hey, you know what? Samira had that same idea like 2 weeks ago. Because it shouldn't be on me to CYA with an email after a meeting saying, here's all the things that we talked about. Here's a few, try to sneakily insert my ideas. That way, so-and-so doesn't get credit for it. But really saying, hey, I'm going to stand up and say, hey, I was in that meeting. Samira did mention so-and-so. Or be in the meeting and say in that time period, hey, I think that's a great idea. So-and-so, can you write that on the board?
Yeah. And even another way of showing up as an ally in the middle of a meeting is when people are talking, make sure one person is talking at a time.
Yes.
And that make sure that one person does not dominate the conversation. And this is very easily done through ground rules at the beginning of a meeting, where you establish that everyone needs to be heard. You give everyone an opportunity to have to provide feedback. You ask people to be short and respectful and mindful of the time frame. It also helps if you have a clear agenda.
Yeah.
With we want to have this conversation done by this time. So if, for example, we have 5 minutes to wrap up the conversation and Ali hasn't had a chance to speak, but someone is going on and on and on, you can respectfully interrupt and say, can you please wrap up that thought, because we only have X amount of time and we still need Ali to hear what Ali has to say. So those are some ways that you can make sure that everyone is being heard.
Parking lot, have your classic parking lot items. In addition to the parking lot, I would say even to go as far for leaders, and I know this is not necessarily a common thing, but you'll see it in some groups that do a lot of like software development where they have Post-its on the wall for where they are, right? Do the same thing in meeting with ideas. Yeah. Let's put Post-its up. Let's make sure that the ideas are flushed out and there's a recap, whether it's an email, whether it's a board that stays up on the wall, like if you're, doing Agile or something like that, you post up all these things.
You can even use a dry erase on your windows if you don't have Post-its.
And you write down every single idea, and in that way you're not ostracizing folks, whether it's the quiet person or whether it's the person that people say, oh, they're a little bit different from all the rest of us, and you make sure that your employees aren't having to CYA themselves or just not get credit for great ideas, and you put everything up.
Absolutely. And then it's also important to make sure you understand what's happening in the meeting. Yeah. Because there are times where you're in a meeting, especially when I do like consulting type roles at work, or I'm doing some lean coaching, and I don't necessarily know what the ins and outs of a certain group or certain process is, and I'm still learning, but I'm kind of joining the meeting in the middle of the process workshops. It's important to be able to take the time and say, hey, can I have, can you just restate that, or can I just confirm that I'm understanding what you're saying? And if you are in a consulting role, definitely go into the meeting prepared. Like, do your research, do any pre-work or pre-reading, because you don't want to spend the whole meeting learning what everything is. But if you are in a meeting and there are things that you don't understand, or if you're leading the meeting, it's always good after a few minutes, read the room and say, hey, is everyone clear about what we're asking? Is everyone clear what the expectation is? Are there any questions? To give people an opportunity to stay on track with how the meeting goes, because different people process things differently, right? You have people with hidden disabilities that you don't know about, so that you want to kind of give them an opportunity to get caught up. Or, you could be saying something and I'm taking it a different direction.
Correct.
Right? But you kind of want to bring people back on track. And these are all different ways that you can facilitate and participate in a meeting that will help ensure that everyone is included.
Yes.
Because what is the saying? That diversity is being invited to the dance, but inclusion is being asked to dance.
Absolutely.
Right.
And lean on your people. Right. It's not, the onus is on the leader to lead, but lean on the expertise of people in the group. There are some people on your team that are just naturally good facilitators.
Yeah.
They just know how to run meetings. It's not always on you to do it.
Yeah.
You may not be good at that. When people start bustling around and talking and ideas are being shot across the table left and right, some leaders kind of clinch up a little bit. They don't know what to do, but there's someone on your team that does.
Yeah.
There's someone on your team that's a great facilitator. There's someone on your team that's a great scribe that knows how to...
Yes, I always need one of those.
Right? That knows how to take a group of sentences or a group of ideas and consolidate them down, right? Like if they're listening to me and they need to shorten what I have to say.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I took a class at Stanford. It was in their advanced project management program. I don't remember which class it was, but we did this exercise where we all had the different types of personalities.
Mm-hmm.
We were separated in different groups around the room. And then we were tasked with like putting doing some sort of project. I don't remember the specifics, but the point was that in order to have an effective team, you need to have the different types of people with the different types of strengths and different types of skill sets.
Yes.
If I'm a natural leader and I'm a natural facilitator, I need an analytical person on the team.
100%.
I need a numbers person on the team. Yep. I need a technical person on the team.
You need a creative and innovative person on the team.
Exactly.
Yes.
You need, in order to have a successful team, you need to have that type of diversity of skills on your team. And so it's great, like you said, to lean on them, allow them to do what they're good at, and acknowledge them for it.
Everybody has a role to play.
Absolutely.
One of my buddies says that to us constantly. When we go out and have a good time and different people act different ways, like, oh, that's so-and-so. Everybody has a role to play, right? That's that person.
That's right.
And that goes all the way back to what we talked about at the top of the hour, which is understanding the cultural differences that you have around you on your team, because that's what influences those sorts of people. I'm an innovative person, but my background is this. I'm a technical person, but my background is that, right? Yeah. And the more you understand those things, the more you get that solid working unit. And to your point, chemistry sometimes is organic, sometimes it's inorganic, sometimes it needs to be developed.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it needs to be, I'm not the best facilitator. Let me have the person who on my team who's a good facilitator to start leading this meeting.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden everyone's being heard. There's organization to the meeting. The meeting is not one of those things where you get on your calendar, it's like, damn, we always meet about this every week. I'm so sick and tired of wasting our, we get nowhere. If you switch it up and if you change the dynamic, you have everyone fulfill their natural roles.
Yeah.
You can take something that has mediocre to no chemistry and change that makeup simply by leaning on people's areas of expertise, leaning on even their cultural strengths, right? And bringing those things together, and you end up with success. And any study will tell you, the more diverse your team is, the more successful it will be. Diversity of thought, diversity of background, those things play a huge role.
I agree. With that, we want to thank you guys for listening to our podcast. We will be doing a part 2 of this session, Bridging the Gap, a guide to cultural engagement, where we'll focus in a little bit more on the social aspect of it outside of the professional, and give you guys some tips on how to help break down barriers with people in your personal lives. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? No. Feel free to reach out to us on our social media. What's our handle? WNS Different. And our email, wnsdifferent@gmail.com. If you have any questions or comments or feedback, please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks for listening.